Tuesday of game week for the Ohio State Buckeyes means it's time to go behind enemy lines. Ohio State and Indiana Saturday afternoon. Let's learn about the Hoosiers. We bring in Jack Ankony from HoosiersNow.com on the FanNation network, powered by Sports Illustrated. All of it coming up next right here on Buckeye Breakdown. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team all Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm Brendan Gulick, along with Anthony Moeglin, live at 7 a.m. every day during Ohio State season to get you ready for all the things you need to know related to Ohio State football, certainly leading up to week one against the Indiana Hoosiers. And we're fired up today that Jack Ankony has joined us to give us a little inside look at what's been going on in Bloomington during summer camp, and what the Hoosiers think they can bring to the table here in week one against the Buckeyes. So before we get to Jack, Anthony, let's just go real quick. Your thoughts on a Hoosiers team that, for whatever reason, always seems to play the Buckeyes relatively tough.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into it with Jack here today because there's some interesting things, I think, with the Hoosiers team that could present a couple issues for Ohio State. Now, that being said, I do think that Ohio State is the superior team coming up this week. But like we talked about yesterday, there's reason to believe that Indiana's going to play Ohio State pretty tough. And if there's a week that Ohio State could get got, it's this one. Being that there's still a lot of question marks throughout our team at the quarterback position, at offensive line, and in our defense with some of those big play problems that we discussed yesterday. So looking forward to getting into it, breaking the Hoosiers down this morning here with Jack.
Well, let's bring Jack in because it's not only Columbus that has football fans trying to figure out what the quarterback situation is going to look like. It's a similar deal out in Bloomington. Jack, thanks for joining us, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
I know it's an early morning, but we appreciate you jumping on with us.
Yeah.
Hey,
sure.
Let's just start there. I mean, Tom Allen's teams are usually pretty well prepared. Obviously, 3 and 4 years ago, a program that looked like it was really starting to turn the corner, and I think they gave Ohio State a pretty good scare in front of nobody, just some cardboard cutouts inside the shoe. Unfortunately, the last 2 years haven't gone quite as well after Michael Penix transferred. So give us an idea what you think the quarterback situation might look like.
Yeah, well, that's kind of been a big problem the last 2 years with that quarterback stability you mentioned after Penix left. And so for week one, the starting job is between Taven Jackson. He's a transfer from Tennessee, spent his freshman year there learning under Hendon Hooker, Joe Milton. It's the younger brother of Chase Jackson Davis, the star basketball player. He's competing against Brendan Sorsby, who's also a redshirt freshman. They're both redshirt freshmen. I think they have 10 combined pass attempts at the college level, which is, especially when you have Ohio State on the schedule week one, it's a pretty daunting task for either of them. And Indiana's been pretty secretive about it. They've internally named a starter, but they're not going to publicly announce it before game one. I think in terms of their skill set, they're honestly pretty similar in terms of size and what they can do. Neither are true runners, but they're both pretty athletic. And I think Indiana's going to want to do a lot of things to get them on the move and not just sit them back in the pocket. If I had to decide, I think Taven is a little bit more elusive than Brendan, but that's not to say that Brendan is incapable as a runner. I think they can both move around pretty well. But at the same time, neither of them are quite the true runner that Dexter Williams was. He played a lot against Ohio State last year, if you guys remember. So I think kind of to Indiana's benefit, they can build an offense that is tailored to Jackson and Sorsby that is at least somewhat similar to what they'd want to run with Dexter. So it's not like you're revamping the whole offense or doing a ton different. Because it kind of seems like it's another season where they could play 3 quarterbacks. I think ideally they'd like to stick with one, but Williams tore his ACL in the season finale against Purdue, and Tom Allen has kind of targeted mid-season. He said maybe a couple weeks early for when he might be able to return. So in that case, it'll be one of the redshirt freshmen or both for the first couple weeks. So yeah, I think Jackson and Sorsby are pretty similar. If I had to make a prediction, I think it's going to be Jackson, but it really wouldn't surprise me if it was Sorsby either, just based on what we've seen in practices.
I think, Jack, one of the big advantages that you just mentioned was that their play styles are very similar. Even going back to Williams of last year, I think that's really big because you're able to have that consistency across scheme, if you will. So you don't have to, hey, if Taven's playing, you have to do one thing, or if Brennan's playing, you have to do another. I think that's a big advantage going into an early year, especially with two guys who are young and inexperienced. One big question that kind of pops up to me when I was just doing some initial background research, a lot of the skill positions are going to be new from what I saw. Looks like you lost a ton of production out of the wide receiver room and in the backfield. So what is kind of the plan of attack, or who are some guys that we can look out for? Both on the outside and in the backfield that are going to be helping out whoever that new quarterback is going to be.
Yeah, Anthony, you're right about that. And I actually think Indiana has done a really good job building that running back and receiver room. I think those are honestly two of their better position groups. In terms of running backs, they're going to play three guys in there, and I think they're all going to have meaningful roles. If you remember Jalen Lucas from last year, he was a first-team All-American as a kick returner. He's not, a between the tackles guy. He's only about 5'9". He's very small, but man, that guy can run like crazy and beat anyone off of one cut. So they're also using him in the slot a lot this year. So I don't, he's not a guy that they're going to give 20 carries up the middle to. I think they're going to try to get him in space. Some screens in the slot, things like that. Josh Henderson was with Indiana last year. I think he averaged about 4 yards a carry and 4 yards per reception. So he can kind of do both too, but he's definitely more of a between the tackles guy. If you had to define an every down back, he's probably more fits that traditional mold. And then they brought in Christian Turner, a running back from Wake Forest, and he had a productive career there the last 2 seasons. I think he is kind of that third back that he's still going to have a meaningful role. He's kind of more similar to Henderson, more of a runner up the middle. But I think all three are going to play, and I think it's also possible that you see Lucas on the field at the same time as Henderson and Turner, just because of what Lucas can offer you in the pass game. And then in terms of wide receiver, Cam Camper was their leading receiver last year. He tore his ACL week 7 or so or maybe week 8 at Rutgers. And he still managed to be Indiana's leading receiver, which tells you about the production that he had. He had about 156 yards in his first Power 5 game against Illinois. We know how talented that secondary was. So he should be ready to go for week 1. We talked to him yesterday. He said they might have him on a snap count, but he'll definitely be out there. Donovan McCulley is another receiver that, might be their number 2 or 3. He came to Indiana as a quarterback. He played that 2021 season after Penix got hurt and was never really able to develop as a passer, so he moved to receiver by his choice. 6'5", super athletic. When you watch Indiana practice, he's one of the biggest, most athletic guys at any position. They bring in E.J. Williams, transfer from Clemson, pretty similar to McCulley and Camper with his size. He's about 6'3", 6'4". So I think they have 3 guys with a lot of good size out there at receiver. In terms of slot, I think we'll see Jalen Lucas line up there a good amount. They brought in DeKeese Carter, who had, I think, over 2,000 yards at Fordham in his 4 or 5 year career. So very experienced guy. Coaches have talked very highly of him just with his experience and leadership. They have a guy, Cameron Perry, who's kind of similar to Lucas, only about 5'9", but he's crazy quick. I think he's kind of an under-the-radar breakout type guy. So, yeah, I honestly think while they did lose some production, I think running back and receiver are two of their better rooms.
Give us an idea, just the attitude and the morale around the team right now, because as I mentioned earlier, it kind of felt like they were building something pretty cool a couple years ago, and it really hasn't gone well, even just in conference play the last two seasons. I have to imagine that there is some pressure on Tom Allen to get this thing right, and on the guys there to figure it out. How are they handling the pressure, and what's the attitude and the morale of the team as they break camp here?
Yeah, I think it's a good combination in terms of kind of the motivating factors that you have throughout this team. You still have a handful of layovers, guys that were there, and believe it or not, in 2019 and 2020, just with all these guys playing 6 years. So there's a few guys that have like Noah Pierre on defense, or Aaron Casey, two of their top defensive guys. There's guys that have been there and that kind of know what that winning felt like, and that are going to kind of be relied on as leaders to kind of bring it back to that point. And then I think just with all the transfers, they've brought in a ton the last two off seasons. I think 24 scholarship transfers this off season, and a lot of those guys are either guys that started at lower levels, and this is their first shot at the Power Five, and they want to make a name for themselves, or it's guys like EJ Williams who he had a breakout freshman year at Clemson, and then kind of lost his job his sophomore and junior year, and he's kind of looking to revitalize his career, and that's kind of the theme you see with a lot of these guys throughout the roster. So, I think in terms of a motivation and morale perspective, I don't think Tom Allen's going to have a hard time getting guys to play hard, which was kind of tough at the end of 21 when things were going bad after the two good seasons. And we'll see if they can put it all together, once games start.
You mentioned you gave a really, really good breakdown of the new look offense, and not necessarily new look in terms of scheme or whatnot, but just the players, and mentioned again kind of an overhaul of the team via the transfer portal. What's that look like on the defensive side? Just by breaking it down and seeing what they were last year. Indiana did struggle on defense, giving up 33 points a game. You could kind of run wild against them, giving up 175 yards on the ground, and then about 275 through the air. So a lot of room for improvement. And it seems as though they relied heavily on the transfer portal. So how does that relate to the defense? Who are some new guys on the defensive side, and some of the playmakers that you're expecting and the team's expecting to make an impact?
Right. So Tom Allen, he's a defensive coach by nature, and last year he regained play calling duties. This year he's handing him back over. They hired Matt Guerreri, who was on staff at Ohio State last year as an analyst, I think. So he'll call plays for the defense, and you're right, it's completely new look all over. I mentioned Noah Pierre. He plays that Husky, kind of the nickel corner position. It's his 6th year. He's a team captain, and so is Aaron Casey, who's played both middle linebacker positions. So those guys, I think are very reliable. I think Indiana feels good about having those leaders, but the rest of the positions are completely new. I think Tom Allen consistently throughout the fall camp has been very excited about the additions they made on the defensive line. They added Philip Liddy from Texas Tech. They added Andre Carter, who was, he was on the Bednarik watch list for best defensive player. He's a transfer from Western Michigan, and really throughout all of spring and fall camp, he's been very disruptive in the pass rush. They brought in Linnell Carr from play that bull position, which is kind of like Indiana's outside linebacker, DN kind of hybrid spot, which is really important in their defense. Anthony Jones will also play that bull spot. He's a transfer from Oregon. Might be forgetting a couple guys on that defensive front, but they've totally overhauled the D line. And I think that's one spot that you really want to see them improve, because the last two seasons they really haven't been able to generate much of a pass rush at all, or really stop the run. So I think with Carter and Carr, you have two guys that at least so far the early signs are good that they might be able to get to the quarterback a little bit better than they have in the past. In terms of the secondary, the cornerbacks are going to be completely new. They had Tywan Mullen and Jalen Williams the last few years. they were 3 or 4 year starters. So you have new guys there. They brought in Jameer Johnson from Texas, Kobe Minor from Texas Tech, Nick Toomer from Stanford. Those 3 transfers I think are all going to play a good amount. And then one of the returners, Jamari Sharp, he's just a redshirt freshman, but he's gotten a lot of praise from coaches, and I think might even start on Saturday against Ohio State, although he didn't really play much last year. Allen said last week that he's been one of their 2 or 3 best corners this offseason. So I think those guys are kind of in the mix at corner. Safety is the one that is kind of the question that the position that I'm maybe most unsure about. They have a couple of returners with Josh Sanguinetti and Lewis Moore, who are all right for Indiana last year. They got a freshman, Amari Farrell, who was one of their top recruits that Allen pointed out yesterday when I asked him about, guys that have maybe improved their stock a little bit. So safety is kind of in question, I think, in terms of who's going to play the most there. But yeah, in general, the defense is going to be completely new. And I know that Tom Allen wants to try to get that right this year. Because like I mentioned, he's a defensive coach by nature, and he's really been, not pleased with how the last 2 years have gone on that side of the ball.
A few more minutes with Jack Ankony from HoosiersNow.com on the Sports Illustrated FanNation network. Jack, I'm trying to figure out some vulnerabilities on this Indiana team, and it's a lot easier to actually pinpoint those when you start to see some film from a team in a given year, right? It's not fair necessarily to always just carry over from one year to the next and say, well, this didn't go well last year, so it's going to be a problem this year. But I know one of the places that this team was really struggling was on the offensive line. How have they addressed that? And maybe not even just at a super specific level, but where can they be better on the offensive line?
Yeah, so they made a coaching change midway through last year and had an interim coach. And I actually think they improved a little bit towards the end of the year in that when at Michigan State, they ran the ball really well. And then they hired Bob Bostad in the offseason to replace the interim. And he has a really impressive track record. If you look back at what he's done, he was the offensive line coach at Wisconsin kind of in the early 2010s when they were really rolling, producing a lot of All-American offensive linemen. So I think that was a really key hire. Yesterday, Tom Allen talked about just how much he thinks that group has grown with Bostad. Their best offensive lineman, Matt Bedford, tore his ACL in week 1 last year, which really put the whole group into a shuffle throughout the whole year. Zach Carpenter, their center, got hurt too. So last year there was really no continuity, and that's obviously really important for offensive line. They have a redshirt freshman they're really excited about with Carter Smith. So I think with Bedford back and with Bostad and just all the praise that he's gotten from Allen and players, I think there's reason to believe that group can be better. Whether it looks like that against Ohio State just because of all the impressive pass rushers they have, we'll see. But I think in a big picture perspective this season, I don't expect it to be a dominant group, but I do think it's going to be better than it was the last few years. And kind of at the end of last year, we saw that it seemed like they kind of figured some things out with the run game with Dexter Williams, and they're going to kind of try to do some similar things with Taven or Brendan to kind of, not make that offensive line, sit back there and give the quarterback 5 seconds. If you can get these kind of quick hitter looks for the offensive line, I think they saw that they were more productive in that way. And that's kind of the one thing that I think Indiana fans want to see this year, because it's been a huge struggle the last 2 years. But I think they're really excited about what Bostad has how he's kind of impacted the line so far.
Jack, I guess just last question for you. Well, 2 questions. One is a little lighthearted. Where should we eat on Saturday? What's the spot?
That's tough. There's honestly a lot of good places. I'm going to go a little bit different. I think a lot of fans would give you kind of the traditionals. There's a place called Fat Dan's on Kirkwood that has great burgers and sandwiches and stuff, and I think it's an underrated spot in Bloomington. That's kind of, if you go to some of the more traditional places, you'll be waiting for an hour or so. But Fat Dan's on Kirkwood is really good.
Fat Dan's, hashtag no free ads, but sounds good. Sounds good. Hey, where can folks find your work?
Yeah, it's HoosiersNow.com. Like you guys, it's the FanNation Sports Illustrated site for Indiana. My Twitter is just my last name. It's at Ankony_Jack. So either of those places, you can see our work, see all our updates and everything.
We'll look forward to seeing you on Saturday. I hope it's a fun opener with a lot of questions answered on both sides, and maybe we'll get an entertaining game. But certainly enjoyed having you this morning, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, Jack Ankony of HoosiersNow.com, our morning guest on Behind Enemy Lines. Anthony, it was certainly a fun conversation. I feel like I learned a little bit more about the team. I definitely want to learn a little bit more about the Buckeyes here in the hours to come. And, we're going to hear from Ryan Day later today. So we'll kind of wrap our show today with just Ryan Day related thoughts, because we'll have his press conference streaming live for you in 4.5 hours when we get down to Columbus. What do you want to hear from Ryan Day today?
Yeah, we'll see what he has to say. It's, even with speaking with Jack, there's a lot of unknowns on the Indiana side based on their personnel. And it's really tough to understand what you're facing when you've never seen a guy. And it sounds like there's going to be a lot of transfers, a lot of new faces from the Indiana Hoosiers. So my guess from what we'll hear from Coach Day is no change in the quarterback conversation. I bet he nips that right away. First question, we know what's coming, but he's going to say, hey, we're going to roll with two guys. And here's the situation of that going forward. But he said, I bet you're going to hear him talk through the goals of the week. When you get to Saturday, we want to play clean. We want to look clean. We want to have smooth operation, at least to start. Make sure that, there's no boneheaded mistakes. That Ohio State is really just on their P's and Q's as they try to figure out what's going on. And then, as the game progresses, the coaching staff will get a better idea of what they're facing, what they're seeing, and where their advantages are. But I bet you're going to want to hear him say, we want to start smooth. And then as the game progresses, we'll start to, take our shots and find our space. So I bet it's going to be a very ho-hum post or press conference today, just because we don't know too much yet about Indiana, and we don't know too much really about Ohio State. And he's not going to say anything to give anything away at this point before the game.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I kind of expect the same thing from Jim Knowles, but I hope we sense an edginess. Mm-hmm. I hope we sense how ready they are. I know Ohio State isn't taking Indiana for granted. I realize the line in Vegas is pretty substantial at basically 4 touchdowns. You only get so many opportunities to make a good impression, and in one more year where there's only 4 teams that make the college football playoff. We talked a little bit about the strength of Ohio State's schedule yesterday with Notre Dame, Wisconsin, obviously Michigan, and Penn State projected to all be really good this year. So there should be lots of opportunities to really showcase yourself against high-quality competition. But when you play a Big Ten team to open the year, you better be ready to go. And a couple of years ago, we saw Ohio State have to really, drag it out against Minnesota because the Gophers really played well that day. I don't think Indiana, from a talent perspective, is quite on Ohio State's level. But man, week 1, you almost feel like you got to throw it out the window a little bit. And coaches will never say that publicly, but sometimes it can get a little ugly, and you just got to find a way to win.
So I totally agree with you. I didn't even think of that. From what we expect to hear from them, I bet they are a little on edge. I bet it's not going to be a smiley, like, hey, we're excited about the year, because not even going back 2 years to Minnesota, but even going back to last year. Yeah, they ended up beating Notre Dame by 2 scores, but it was a little bit of a battle there for the for the whole game, really, until really the end. So I bet you're right. I bet it's going to be a little uncomfortable, maybe a little edgy from both those guys because of the importance. And you just cannot afford to slip up and even based on our conversation yesterday, you have to look good, just because how competitive the Big Ten is going to be this year with Penn State and Wisconsin and Michigan. If there's even any bit of, hey, this, if they're even at any point, you're going to look back in some of the common opponents, and you don't want to have a blip on your radar, especially early on in the season.
Well, and the reality is, the quarterback that passes the eye test better might be the one that wins the starting job. So, who can handle the pressure in that moment? I think it really is going to matter. And maybe they know who that is already, and they're not saying the same way Tom Allen is, although Tom at least acknowledged that they've decided on their starting quarterback internally and haven't said anything. I guess we're going to find out on Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be a very telling day media wise for us, I believe, just with what's said and what's not said. There's a lot of stuff you can do. These coaches are so good at saying a lot without saying a little, but not saying anything at all. I messed that up.
Annoyingly good at it.
Annoyingly good. And Ryan Day is one of the best at it. So I'm not sure he'll say anything outwardly that's going to lead to anything, but I bet if we read between the lines, he's going to drop a couple nuggets here and there, that'll tell us some things. But either way, they better come ready to go on Saturday.
We got lots to come still the rest of the week for you on the Buckeye Breakdown podcast. We'll try to give you a little bit of an inside look at what you can expect from Ohio State's offense against the Hoosier defense, and vice versa, before we get into maybe more macro level game preview, talking about the Big Ten as a whole going into officially week 1. Certainly those conversations to go. Obviously this afternoon at 12 noon at the Woody, we're going to hear from Coach Day and Coach Knowles. Tomorrow, Wednesday night after practice, a bunch of players will be made available to us, although the athletic communications department for the Bucks has not decided on that until this afternoon. So we don't know which players tomorrow, but we know we will have players tomorrow after practice. So you can check all that out over on our YouTube channel here as well. Ryan Day and Jim Knowles will stream live. The players, we will post those after the fact, but they'll be up pretty quickly. So keep it locked here. And of course, Anthony and I will be back with you tomorrow morning, Wednesday at 7 a.m. as we continue to preview Ohio State and Indiana. For all the latest on Ohio State football, check out BuckeyesNow.com. Follow us along our social media channels, and we certainly hope you'll make Buckeye Breakdown a part of your daily stop. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you in a little bit down at the Woody as Ryan Day takes the stage for the first time in week 1.